Thank you so much for joining us. I almost said this afternoon. It's this afternoon here where I'm sitting. And I understand that we have folks from all different areas. So again, thank you for joining us today. So I'd like to start by
Mhm.
telling you a bit about how we got here. Dale and I are both members of a collective of women leaders in Nova Scotia, and we call ourselves Using Our Influence. We use an approach called critical appreciative inquiry to tackle tough subjects that have an impact on the lives of rural women and girls. We have hosted a number of community conversations around concerns such as sexual violence, domestic violence, substance use, gambling. And we facilitate in such a way that we recognize how difficult those topics are. And we also recognize the resilience and the strength that lies in the community. I know for myself, one of the things that inspires me is knowing that as a professional working in the field of domestic violence, violence against women, I know I'm not alone because I know that there are so many folks in the community who are responding when people talk about their experiences. And one of the takeaways from the Using Our Influence work, one of the highlights for us has been there's a place for professional work, no question. But there are so many spaces where what is needed is compassion. And small acts and compassionate acts make a huge, huge difference. We've had the honor of doing this work in our home province here, Nova Scotia, Canada. We've also presented our work nationally and internationally. Um, this particular work, the Compassionate Conversations, they're part of a project called Safer Spaces that's funded by a national organization called the Canadian Women's Foundation. So we'd like to say thank you to them for providing the funding. And this work began, I'm going to say a year ago. The pandemic means I don't quite know what day of the week it is, let alone what month. And we received funding from Canadian Women's Foundation to hold conversations with folks working in the beauty industry. So, folks who do hair, nails, makeup, estheticians, we've, like most things we do, we defined very broadly. What we discovered was folks were reaching out, wanting to have a conversation about how to be helpful and how to be prepared around difficult disclosures from far beyond folks working in the beauty industry. So the project has kind of grown beyond the original intention. So that's how we got here. Now, I'm just having a moment to see if I can get my slides to forward. Oh, just give me 1 second. Here we go.
Mhm.
It seems I
It's
have a bit of a lag.
magic.
It is
Sorry,
magic.
it's
It,
magic.
it only took 5 clicks, and who knows why 5 was the magic number, but it was.
Mhm.
So we'd like to begin, and Lou, you did a wonderful job of introducing the importance of self-care in our time this evening, and yes, we're going to echo that as well. Um, but I'd like to take a couple of moments just to talk about how we would like to hold space for each other this evening. Um, we talked about the fact that this is being recorded, and I'll echo that the intention of the recording is not to capture um, you as participants and what you say or who you are or what you look like. The intention is to record Dale and I as we present, because at the end of this project, what we'd like to have is a legacy video. So folks who are not able to attend a live training may be able to go on and view something that will help them in having compassionate conversations. So if you have any questions or concerns following the presentation this evening about that, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Dale or to Lou. I'm sure that would, okay, I see Lou nodding. We will be talking about some difficult topics, and it may be hard for some. Please take care of yourself. That's what is most important. We can only help to support others when we look after ourselves. So that is first and foremost. If you choose to interact this evening through the chat or during question and answer, we would ask that you always speak with kindness and consideration for others. And when I interact in situations where we're talking about difficult subject matter, I always remind myself, I can tell my story. I have to be very cautious not to tell someone else's story. So we would ask that when you share your experiences, that you frame those experiences in such a way that it is your experience rather than the experience of someone else. This time is about taking care of each other. And when we pay attention to our own needs and our own reactions, then we'll be able to hold that respectful and honored space for one another. And let's see if it takes 5 clicks to get to the next slide.
Okay.
There.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rhonda. This is Dale. And like Rhonda, I would just like, before I talk about the bit of slide here, I'd like to thank everyone for, the invitation. Rhonda and I, to be honest, we're a little tickled pink, as it were, to be invited. I too am from Nova Scotia right now, but every now and then I might flick into a different accent. For those of you who are from all over, I'm actually from Newfoundland, which is even a smaller province with less people. And I've come over here, and I've been privileged to be part of the Using Our Influence group for the 15 years we've been meeting together. And in that time, we've done so much work, which has led to us where we are right now. And, like so many things, and I just want to state this, reiterate it in different words from my personal experience, is that for all of us here, and I don't even know anyone, I only see 4 people along the side, but that what we learn and where we go inform us not only professionally, and I'm sure in this audience, in this group here, there are professions all over the entire gamut. Myself, I'm a college educator who does addictions counseling, who's become knowledgeable in the area of trauma-informed practice, right? But all of this relates to our interpersonal talking one-on-one with people. You don't need to be a professional and as Julia said, hold each other up. Compassionate conversations is about how do we hold each other up while we hold ourselves up. And as an adult educator who's done a lot, I can sit here and I can use really large academic words. I can. And Rhonda's heard me and told me, occasionally tells me, Dale, bring it down to not 10 syllables, because that's the academic jargon. But here, like when we talk about, and in a bit, I'll use the word trauma-informed practice, but compassionate conversations, that is how we demonstrate that. And tonight, that's what we're going to do. Our purpose here is, and it's in our little sign here, compassion for others. Compassion, it also starts with ourselves. So tonight we'll talk about what does that mean for us and what do you already know? Because I suspect, as when I start most of my workshops around this, that most of us actually already know a lot of this, but perhaps we need to give ourselves permission to know that we know and to use what we already know with a few things rolled around. And I'm not, as I would say to my students who are not vegans, it's like a beautiful tenderloin steak with a beautiful cured piece of bacon around it that if you're vegan, change it to tofu, okay? What you do is you have what you know, and then you roll a little something around it along with boundaries. If you could just flick to the next one here. The next slide for me, Rhonda. Now, of course, I'm like the amazing women before me. I'm going to say the same thing. Self-care. If for compassionate conversations, you know, if you were one of my students, and I teach a full program in a college here, I spend 2 weeks just on this one slide talking about to be compassionate to others. When we hold ourselves in the same way, it allows us to know and give ourselves permission to speak. So one of the things here, and that's my little dog in my backyard here, that and our little puppies can be such guidance for us, those of us who are spirit led to support animals, all right, that we need to think about this not just while we're in here for the hour or two we're here, but when we're home at work and when we're interacting. And the other thing I put above or on the side, whichever it might be for you folks who are seeing me, is to see this grounding exercise. Like, so any one of you who've been in therapy, obviously you've seen this, but you don't need to do it with it professionally. You can do it yourself. If you find yourself tonight or anywhere uncomfortable, think about 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you feel, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste, or any version of that, the senses. You know, I think I might have said it in a different way that it's up there. But what it is to bring yourself into your place. So you can do this today or any other time. And the next slide, please. Okay. Because what I want you guys to do, and it'll fit right in, compassionate conversations and holding up each other and holding ourselves. This is not new. So I want you guys, you folks, to think of a time in your own life. I'm not going to ask you guys to necessarily share it, but just take a moment. Think of a time when you shared something difficult with someone and you felt supported by that person that you can find it in. Think of this, a real story. It's not one of those pedantic ones where you were on a mountain and you felt it. It's like, I had this actual exchange with someone. And I want you to think about that. And think about, what did that person say or do that helped you feel supported? What was it? And I just give you a second to think about that, because I'm going to ask you to think of this story, think about what it was, and then can I ask folks, if you want to, you can share, but I've often found out loud, I find that on these things, people often don't want to unmute. They want to sit there and digest and think. So if you could take a moment and maybe type into the chat, what was it that happened? What did that person say or do that you knew that you felt supported by that person? What was it? And just think, and I'm going to just sit here for a moment. Sometimes I have trouble just keeping my mouth quiet because of my being a teacher, but type it in. What was it? Because this is a good place to start our discussion about what compassionate conversations are. Because sort of, may I dare say, I'm going to lean in and say this. Maybe we already know a lot about what this means. And this is where we start supporting ourselves to know. We uphold ourselves and reinforce that. So, well, people are starting to type. Now, if anyone wants to speak, you can just do that too. Okay, so we've got, they listened to you deeply. They held eye contact. They're being heard accurately. Acceptance and non-judgmental. More than anything else, they listened. Okay, listened, acknowledged and validated the experience. All of that. Anyway, Rhonda? Unmute, Rhonda. Oh,
I just did.
okay.
So when we think about what it means to listen compassionately or to listen with sensitivity, and notice how Dale framed her question. Dale framed the question as, think about a time when you felt supported. Now, when I listen to Dale read some of what is in the chat, and listen, a tissue and a hug, feeling of being heard and acknowledged. They said the people that are really truly your friends will still be there. Being heard accurately. Now, let's take another moment and turn this. and think about, these are the things that helped you feel supported. So it probably follows that those are the same things that would help other folks feel supported. And I'm sure you've already noticed a bit of a theme happening, which is we hold knowledge. We already all hold knowledge about how to be supportive, how to be compassionate. And, oh, now it's going to want me to click 5 times again. And what it means to have a trauma sensitive approach. So the language is slightly different. It's going to take more than 5 times this time. 1 second. I think I know. There we go. A trauma sensitive approach is compassionate listening. And in my work in women's transition houses and outreach services, and Dale in her work, because Dale has done some training with staff who I have worked with, we've spent a lot of time talking about those big words, those big concepts, the big ideas. And whether we say trauma sensitive approach, whether we talk about trauma informed practice, there are many ways, whether we talk about resilience, with all of these words that feel very weighty. If we talk about compassionate listening and we talk about communication, how we talk to each other, and not just how we talk, but how we sit with each other, often in a very physical way. Those bits of communication, those verbal, the body language, makes a huge, huge difference in supporting folks who clearly already trust us because they're telling us some really tough stuff. And because they've chosen to tell you something really challenging, that trust relationship, for whatever reason, is already there. So if we intentionally reflect on what we have said to someone or what someone has said to us in the past that has been helpful, then like anything else, and I believe Dale already said this earlier, we practice, we get better, we get more comfortable. And if we reflect on these things on a regular basis, then it becomes intentional. It feels more second nature, but it becomes more comfortable and it becomes more intentional. One of the things that we will encourage, and if we were presenting here in Nova Scotia, we would give you a list of resources and organizations that offer services. We do encourage you to know the resources and services in your area, because that's a piece of learning that I think is helpful as we move forward to reflect on how to have passionate conversations. If we know the resources and we have a bit of a relationship with some of those resources, then that can be incredibly helpful to both us and to the folks we are supporting. And you'll hear me say that again in a little bit.
So we've brought this slide up to help folks get a sense of what compassionate listening is, that it is having trauma sensitive conversations. As Rhonda has said in the previous slide, that it's in how we speak to people. It's about creating a relationship with folks. Now, when I talk to folks, and I've been doing these workshops for puddles of years, I remember the first time I presented on the word trauma sensitive, trauma informed, and people looked at me and said, I can't do that. I'm not a therapist. And I'm sitting there now, I don't teach, I do sometimes train and do courses with people who are at that level, but most of my training is with like normal people, like who are here, right? So I find that it's just as important to say what it isn't as to what it is, because we need to know that you do not need a PhD to be trauma informed. You don't need a PhD, a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, a community college diploma, advanced training, or a lot of training at all to be trauma sensitive. It's not a counseling technique. However, if you were one of my counseling students, I'd be telling you, you do a lot better if you follow this. Okay. Having said that, we interact and hold each other up in a way that doesn't require anyone to actually disclose that they've had a traumatic event. You don't need to know any of that. You do not need people to tell you. This is a way of being, an approach that actually very effective with everyone, because it's how we relate and how we create a relationship with other people, how we uplift each other. Or as I think Julia said earlier, and I'm looking down, I want to quote Julia correctly here, flourishing communities. That's what this is. All right. So we are in our relationship with others. It's not about counseling. It's not about self-disclosure. That instead, it's the way we do that communication, verbal and nonverbal, about creating safety and realizing that choice is in the hands of the person. You don't have to solve anything. Geez, maybe that might be the biggest learning here. We don't have to fix anything to have compassionate listening and be trauma sensitive. Instead, dare I say, and I suspect that most of us do this, we see the positive and the strengths in each other, and we maybe highlight that. And that is what it means to be a compassionate listener in a nutshell. You know, you do not need a PhD. You use the very things that you spoke of earlier. Okay. Yeah, as it said, we don't need to fix anything. We need to see the strengths in each other and uplift each other. And we can do this. And we need to give each other permission to do it in our society. Yeah. And you can change. Yeah, Rhonda.
And while you'll hear us both using language that makes it sound as if we're saying, this is so easy. We can all do this. We all do this every day. It's not easy. We don't want to suggest that it's easy, because sitting with someone who is experiencing physical or emotional pain is not easy. But as Dale just said, once we realize we don't have to be there to fix it, holding space, being supportive in our words and our body language has an immense impact on the folks who choose to speak with us about their experiences. And the other thing I'd like to highlight a bit that Dale just said is this notion of we don't need to know everything that happened. We don't need to know any of the details. It doesn't matter. What matters is we're right here, right now, holding that space of compassion. And that does make a difference. So as you can read here, I don't need to read it to you, but compassionate listening, it's that personal practice. And it's something that, again, I believe because you're here right now listening to us in having this conversation, you're already doing this. Again, it's reflecting, it's cultivating it. It's getting more of what has already worked for you or for someone you've helped to support. So it is a skill set. Again, as Dale said, don't need 3 degrees in it. It's a skill set you already have that you can nurture. You can nurture and you can grow what has worked. And it's a gift. Compassion is a gift that we give to folks who feel marginalized, who are in pain, but it's also a gift that we give to ourselves, because as we are able to support other folks, then we help others around us to also understand what would be supportive for us when we may need that. So compassionate listening is something that we do daily with everyone. A person does not have to disclose that they've experienced trauma to benefit from being listened to with compassion. It's for us to always be open to changes and to doing better. That's what the reflection part is about. None of us are perfect. Uh, uh, er, when we were introduced, and over 50 years of experience between us and all of those things, every day I learn what I don't know. Every day I learn what I can do better. It doesn't matter whether you are 10 or whether you're 110. There's always something to learn. And remembering to always be gentle, to be gentle with ourselves and to be gentle with others. So communication. Communication is the key. Remembering to listen, remembering we don't just listen with our ears, we listen with our bodies, with our minds. We reflect that in what we say and also in what we do. Now, back to a little bit of nuts and bolts for a second. We have not talked about mandatory reporting yet. So there are situations where someone may choose to talk to us about a situation where a child or a vulnerable adult may be at risk. It is absolutely imperative that all of us understand what the rules are around those kinds of disclosures wherever we are living, because there is always a law that governs what is supposed to happen if someone who is not able to look after themselves, is not able to advocate for themselves, like a child, like a vulnerable adult. There are always laws and rules in place, and it's incredibly important that we all know what that looks like in our own area, because sometimes disclosures do involve situations that would require a referral to an agency. So again, if we were talking about this within our jurisdiction of Nova Scotia, we would be having a bit more conversation around where those lines get drawn. We've chosen not to spend time tonight doing that, but we do want you to understand that it's important that we all understand what the rules are in our area. So reflective listening is a technique that makes the other person feel understood and cared for. So when you say, I understand that you're hurting right now, or I hear that this is a difficult time for you, the person feels and understands that you truly care. And that can be transformative for that person. There's no need to make promises. And in fact, a very dear friend of mine said to me once, it's just as important for you to know what you can't do as it is to know what you can do. And that has a role in compassion, in compassionate listening and compassionate conversations. Remember, you don't have to fix the situation. It's also okay. And in fact, we encourage that you know where your boundaries lie. Because unless you are physically and emotionally safe, it's very difficult to be there for someone else. Over to you, Dale.
Okay. I like some of the stuff. I just want to comment on some of the things that are going on in the chat. And I'm noticing there's some amazing things here. Dawn Ewan has put up some of the legalities here for where she is. So that's important to know. I also like Alex, you wrote, it's like reframing for the person when it's hard for them to reframe themselves. Yeah, spot on. And reframing it in plain language so that the person, you don't have to make any interpretations or anything. And this is it's a good strategy about listening to what the person's saying. And we tend to get better at that. I just want, as an educator now, I'm just going to flick this in. We tend to get better at our reflections the more we do it. Okay. Having said that, I'm also going to come over and continue to talk about some of the principles that we're using here, and the things that are in the chat fit right in here. Okay, that if you were one of my students, again, I've got a whole course on just this slide. All right, but having said that, you don't need the whole course. What you need is to take what's been said and then roll it up here. And as I say this, think about the things that you thought about when you knew you were being listened to. That's what this is. All right. The first thing is awareness. First of all, accepting that something happens. Like, again, though, if you were, I was doing something else and we had longer, I could point out to you with data, and I'm really good at that because when you teach, you have to show lots of studies, that at least 2/3 of the population have experienced some form of significant adverse childhood experiences for people who've done it. I don't need to go any further, only that we can just assume everyone's experienced something. We don't need to know what it is. And as a result, many people get triggered. In other words, sometimes we see things in front of us that have nothing to do with us in the situation. So that's one of the things I would invite you to understand as you speak to people when stuff has happened to them. All right. Now, with it in here, what we're doing is we're talking to someone and holding the space. So we are creating safety and trustworthiness. That's what we're doing by following all the stuff again, what Julia wrote or said, flourishing communication, holding up each other, empathy and action. That's what we're doing. We're creating safety, and then we become more trustworthy. And the more that you do that, the more likely people are going to be more honest with you or more free with you. And honest is an interesting word. I don't know where that came because it's not really what we're looking for here. We're looking for people to feel more comfortable with us. All right. So with these principles, awareness, we're building safety, that remember the choice and the control is always with the person. They get to decide what to do. Like one of the things as Rhonda is talking up before me about, mandatory reporting. The one thing that went through my mind, and I know this is often when I'm doing training, it always comes out, is that if an adult is telling me something, I immediately have to do something about it. Well, no. And I like to say that directly because most of us think that if we hear about something that might have been historic, then we have to take action. No, unless the person's a vulnerable person. But most of the time in our personal world, that's not what's happening, right? If someone tells us about something in the past, it's up to them. It's their choice what to do. And even now, you have to be really careful about not telling someone what they need to do. All right. And colleagues, I'm going to put this here for you, is that the more you give up believing that, the more likely you're going to be able to have more comfortable conversations. Because I think my experience with myself, I'm not even talking about my students, the more I realized I didn't need to fix something, the more I could sit with someone and ask them a question. So what do you need? What can I do to help you? Where do you need to get the help you need? What are you going to do when we'll finish this conversation? Because that's often a compassionate conversation, asking questions of people so they can answer back, or even here commenting and reflecting back about person's coping and their strength and their resilience. That's what strength building is. All right. And helping them see where they need to go and what they can do. And then one other thing before I ask you to turn this is, I do this in my professional world, but really what really highlighted as everyone was talking here was an experience I had yesterday. I'm walking my little dog up the street because we are allowed outside here. We are in lockdown, but I know I'm not allowed to be any closer than 6 feet to anyone. All right. But there's someone up the street here who has another little dog, and our little dogs play with each other. I got a 9-pound terrier. And when I went up there yesterday, she was one of the people, the person who owns the dog was crying on her backyard. I went over and I found out that her niece had passed on the weekend, very tragically, right? And I sat there. Now, she doesn't have the sweetest clue who I am, except I'm Charlie's mom. She doesn't even know my first name, okay, which is often what happens. Charlie's my dog, okay? So I sat there and I went, okay. And I sat on the asphalt with her for an hour and a half. I sat down and she was about 20 feet from me. And I believe I had one of these compassionate conversations with a woman who doesn't even know my first name, except we know the names of our dogs. Is that not? This is it. Pedal to the metal, flourishing and holding up each other, using these same principles. Anyway, I wanted to give that example. So, Rhonda, if you could move to the next one. Yeah, I know any moment you're going here. So, I want you to think about this now. Of course, we like scenarios. Of course, if you were in my class, I'd be sending you off small groups left, right, and center, even with the online options. Okay. Thinking about what we've spoken about today, because of course, it's really important for us to think about how to use this information, right? But here's a scenario. We got a friend, coworker, buddy, the woman who is Misty Dawn's friend, which is mom. Oh, that's the name of the dog yesterday. Okay, Misty. All right. And you have someone who appears to require constant reassurance about how their parents, and they're very worried about the timing of when they meet you, or however that is. And you want to make sure they want to make sure they're home. Okay. All right. And they don't want to be caught or make their partners upset or anything. I want you to think about, in the context of what we've talked about today thus far. Okay. What stands out here? What do you think you might say that would be most helpful? Because, you know, Rhonda and I, in all of our workshops, we want to make sure whatever we're doing is helpful to you. Okay. Think about, how would you respond, or what do you think would be the helpful thing there for this, in this scenario? How would you respond? How would you respond? Now take a few moments. And again, please type in the chat for anyone who wishes. What would you say? What would you say? How would you respond? What would you say? Oh, I don't see the messages because I can't see.
One of the things that I'll add in here, Dale,
Mhm.
is
Go ahead.
in this scenario, sometimes we get caught in what we think this person is experiencing. So folks look at this scenario and think, "Oh, what's going on? What is this about? What's happening here?" And what we're asking is maybe to flip that a tiny bit. Think that. It's absolutely fine to think that. But how could you be supportive regardless of what might or might not be going on in this scenario?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. I'm reading the comments, and the thing that really strikes me is that the folks who are writing, many of you recognize again that you might not know exactly what's going on, what you just said, Rhonda, which is very good. And always asking the person, what do you need? What are you going to do after these conversations? Or, you know, um, asking people what they need. What time would you like to meet? Are you okay? Asking open-ended questions. Okay, how can I help you? What can we work around? Reflect, reflect back what you might be seeing. Now, mind you, I put this here too. The more we know the person, the more likely we'll be able to do what I would call a deeper level of reflection, which means that we have this bigger sense of what might be happening, right? Anything you need. What can you do with the timing? That type of stuff. Yeah. Being ever so careful about the assumptions you make, and then working around with what the person's sharing with you, that type of stuff, right? And being compassionate. In other words, upholding the person and being ever so careful about assumptions you're making and that type of stuff. Yes. So, how to respond? Again, here, and fitting in with what I had up here before, is that, as we said, being non-judgmental, having an awareness that it could be something, but it may not be anything we think. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm really good at making a hell of a lot of, oh, excuse me, I just swore. I am really good at making a lot of assumptions, and we know what assumptions make. Those words can be sussed out a bit. can make out of you and me, as it were, but also knowing that sometimes our assumptions are correct and that we can support a person and ask questions and work around it in a way that the person knows that we're there for them. We hold them up. And the other piece is that we don't have to fix it. It's up to the person to decide what to take. And it's written here again, because again, with Rhonda and I in our work, we learned ourselves, and by virtue of who we work with and the workshops that we do, is that we need to give ourselves permission to know that we don't have to fix this. We don't have to call and report it anywhere unless there's certain addendums, which is not the majority of what any of us do. And that it's up to the person. And perhaps, even with this, when you're building safety and trustworthy choice and strength, if it's with our friends, the more we do this, the more likely they're going to really trust us. The more likely our communities will be trusting environments. So if someone wanted to take any other steps, they'd know who to come to, because you're a trustworthy, honest person who's willing to listen. And of course, to remember to affirm that each of us will make our own decisions. I mean, for me, I often find, and I do a lot of student stuff too, right? And everything. I often say, well, and I have learned a long time ago, and Rhonda has heard me say this. I have learned that often for me in my brain, it's best for me to state what I think is the obvious, and then the person's not waiting, trying to wonder what I'm thinking, what I think is the obvious. So I often say, well, of course I know it's all your decision. And what do you want to do? And of course I know. It's you get to decide, even if I suggest something to you. And I even say that flippantly in a kind way so that people know that I know. Sometimes it's best to state the obvious. Then, especially if someone's in a situation where, and you can't tell by looking at someone if they're in a relationship that has abuse in it. You just can't tell. You can't tell someone's background by looking at them, anything. So I often state what I think is the obvious. And it might not be obvious if a person's in an environment where they are feeling a little controlled for me to say, well, of course it's your decision. And I've got some ideas, but before I give you any ideas, what have you been thinking about? Or the next one is, if you are chatting with someone who's trying to do something, well, what do you think? What have we seen other people do? And having said that, the woman I was sitting on the asphalt with yesterday for an hour or so while our dogs played in our garden, these are the same words I said to her. Well, what do you think you need to do? Or, wow. And I said, that sounds really, really hard. And then she said, how do I solve this? Well, I don't really know. What do you think? Or I've even asked a question, do you think the solution is possible right now? And you see my tone, voice, and cadence, the way I spoke. Asked a question. I don't need, and I'm sitting there because there were a lot of intricacies of this details that I don't need to go into, but there were a lot. And I was sitting there thinking, oh, I really feel. And in my brain, as I'm holding her in the light and holding her up, because, and obviously there was a reason I walked by with my dog at that time. We all find ourselves in these positions in our communities where we walk by at the right time, however that is for us. Okay, so to respond with compassion to ourselves and others. And Rhonda, if you could move to the next slide.
And, now see, I think I've figured out the trick.
There you are.
In my work, in working with women who have experienced violence, I often have conversations with folks who are trying to figure out how to get their sister, their mother, whoever, to do what they think they need to do what they need to do to be safe. And one of the conversations I have most often with the neighbors, the friends, the family members is patience. When the time is right, the time will be right. Don't ever shut the door. As long as the door is open, when that person is ready to walk through, you will be there. And that is what is so important. Remember that sometimes folks may experience triggers or flashbacks, and that can be frightening for the person witnessing and supporting. If you think back to, I think it was the third or fourth slide that Dale was talking to us about grounding tools. Doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be complicated. Can you tell me if you see something green right now? Can you feel all of your toes in your shoes? Something so simple. Something, what do you smell? What do you feel? Do you feel the air on your arms? So simple, but can help someone to come back to the right now. Prioritize your own self-care. If we think back to a time when we were able to fly, remember how flight attendants will say, if the oxygen mask comes down, put your own on first before you try to help someone else. That's what I think about when I think about supporting others. I need to be able to breathe before I can help someone else to be able to breathe. So that staying calm, the self-management, the more we practice that, the easier it becomes in that moment. And Dale.
Yes, and we are in our last few minutes here, Rhonda. I always like to put this slide up because it's really important in our workshops to think about what we're taking away. So Rhonda and I always talk about with the pearls of wisdom, because she goes, oh, I'm not really sure. But the pathway on the left, that's one of my earlier paintings. The artwork behind me, I painted these things in the back here. And what I like for everyone when they're attending workshops, or anything, because what's really the pedal and hits the metal, as it were, is what do you take away? I want to invite you to think about here the few minutes we've had, and I know we've got questions and all that. There'll be a question time and all that. But think about, well, even if it reinforces what you already know, all right. What is it that you've taken away that will be useful for you to use? What pearls of wisdom would you offer yourself next week after having spent this amazing time listening to coming to today? And this, it's also related to so many other things here that are being offered. This is one of the events. But how does this fit into what it is you've come here for? Okay, how do you move from here? Because, one of the things is to think about your plan in terms of what you want to do. But now, because often we were together, and one day we'll be in place with each other, I'd be handing out little sticky things, and I'd have everyone write it little things, what their pearls of wisdom, and run up and put them on the wall everywhere, and then we'd send you off for a coffee break and theme it. Okay, but we can't do that right now. But for you to think about for yourself, and please write it down for yourself, even if you don't want to put it in the chat, because that's not what matters. What matters is for yourself, from what you've heard here, to imagine yourself next week. Yes.
And we'd encourage you to think about what kinds of support do you need for yourself? What do you need in order to be there to support others? And this is once again where I do the little pitch for know the resources in your area. And don't just know them on the computer screen or from the pamphlet. If you'd like to know more about an organization that you've never needed to access, call them up, have a conversation, learn the names of the folks who work there, who volunteer there, because those connections will help to support you as you support others. Again, I'll say, remember, this is not about being a professional. It's not about putting yourself at physical or emotional risk. And the seed that we sow in every event that we facilitate is small actions matter. In fact, the small actions matter the most.
And just to reiterate what Rhonda is saying here is that nothing small. When you are holding each other up, everything we do is important. It doesn't, it really is. I'm becoming speechless because I know it's so overwhelming for me to say this, because we all seem to think, again, my years of teaching, it has to be this huge thing. No. And compassionate conversations start with being compassionate to ourselves. So when you want to be compassionate with others, you also have to be with yourself. Hence the reason why we're talking about self-care. All right. Again, our summary here. Remember, you don't have to ask any questions. You don't even need any disclosure. All right. You strengthen this compassionate connection by how we respond and by how we listen. And sometimes it's okay to tell someone, I really don't know what to say, but I'm sitting here with you. If you don't really know what to say, why not just tell the person, I'm not really sure, but I'm sitting with you and I'm listening. Okay. You're not required again to fix it. You validate the experiences, and here's some sentences that you can use. That must be difficult. Is there anything I can do to help you? I have some resources or numbers if you want them, or I can find them for you. I don't really know them right now, but I'm sure. Most of us have these things. Let me just Google and see what's around.
Also encourage folks to maintain positive self-care activities. And the best way to do that is by doing it ourselves. By modeling, we're helping to support. The last two bullets, the be aware of mandatory reporting in your area, being aware of your community resources. We've already talked a bit about that. And again, I will reiterate the importance of that for our own knowledge and in helping us to feel that we do have the resources behind us to have those compassionate conversations.